Hey, what is going on, guys? Arvident Stealth here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the best blind picks for 10.7. So these are going to be champions that have a very low amount of hard counters or just good counters in the meta at the moment. So they're really strong champions to pick up, and you can play them pretty much every single game and have good success with them. Alright, so let's start things off here with a couple top lane picks. First up is going to be, in my opinion, the strongest top laner, strongest bruiser champion in the game if you can play him well, and it's Wukong. So this champion is banned around 50 or 60% of the time right now, so you're just not going to be able to play him every single game, but whenever he's open, I think he's a must pick right now. He's just a very strong champion. A lot of his main weaknesses that he had in pre-reworked Wukong are no longer existent in the reworked Wukong. He had a much weaker laning phase before. He was very easily exploitable in the laning phase, but that's not really the case with the new Wukong. With his new passive, it just makes his laning phase much stronger. He's a very good dueling champion, and he's also a very good team fighting champion too. And I feel like a lot of bruiser picks, they're usually very good in the 1v1, they're very good in the side lane, but they do tend to struggle a little bit more in team fights. But I don't really think that's the case with Wukong. I think he's just overall a very well-rounded bruiser pick. He's got really good engage, he's got great team fight potential, he's got good 1v1 potential. There's pretty much everything in this champion that you would want for a top lane pick right now, so just look to pick this champion up whenever he's open. I think he's an extremely good pick for solo queue for 10.7. And then for the second top lane pick, it's going to be Maokai. So Maokai is basically like the new Ornn now. With Ornn getting nerfed a couple patches ago, he's no longer like this S tier super good top lane pick, but Maokai's now kind of taken that spot. He's now like the best tank you can play in the top lane for 10.7. He's just a very consistent pick. You have pretty good matchups in the laning phase. You don't really get hard smashed by anything right now. Even if you do lose lane with the pick, he's always going to be useful. You're playing a tank with good engage, good CC. You're always going to be useful come the mid to late game, and you do a really good job at countering a lot of other bruiser top laners come the mid to late game, because if you're looking at team fight against something like a Renekton, a Sett, a Garen, a Darius, a Jax, like these champions, if they don't get onto the back line, if they're not killing your high priority targets, they're going to be a lot less useful than you in fights. So you can just do a really good job at tanking those champions, at just locking them down, CCing them for a very long duration, and just being very useful for your team because of your easy to hit crowd control and your tankiness once you do get a few items. Maokai is also one of the few top laners that does tend to perform pretty well against Wukong right now in 10.7, so if you are having a difficult time against that pick right now, if you just want to play a champion that can at least go even in the laning phase with Wukong, can match his team fight potential in the mid to late game, then Maokai's a really good pick to play into him for this patch. So let's take a look at a couple jungle picks now. My first one up here is going to be Olaf. So Olaf does have one of the strongest early games for any jungler at the moment. There's very few junglers in the game that can actually match his dueling potential, match his early skirmish. So it makes it so that if you know how to play this champion well, if you can look for calculated invades, if you can look to skirmish or look to get into 2v2s in the early game, then you're going to win those almost every single time with Olaf, and you can really snowball the early game out of control if you know what you're doing on this pick. So your main objectives with this pick in the early game in order to succeed with him is just look to constantly skirmish, invade the enemy jungler if they're playing a weaker early game pick, exploit that matchup, look to control early dragons, get to that dragon soul, and just play around whichever lanes do give you the best assistance in your early skirmish. So if you got something like a Nasus or Kayle top lane, don't be playing a top side, don't be invading the enemy's top side jungle or contesting the top side scuttle crab unless for some reason they do get priority in the early game. But if you got something like a Braum or a Lucian bot lane, look to play to that bot side, exploit that 3v3, look to skirmish a ton bot side of the map, invade the enemy's jungle, and really take advantage of your early game on this pick. And then for my second jungle pick, it's going to be Nunu, and matchups really don't matter too much for this champion because your main objective with the pick is for you to just spam gank in the early game. That's how you should be playing Nunu in my opinion. That's to where I've seen most Nunus have the most success in solo queue, is where even as early as level 2, you just look to snowball down bot lane, you just look to pick up a very early either summoner spell advantage or a very early kill, and you're just constantly looking to gank with this pick. If the enemy laners are shoved out, then you should be looking to gank with Nunu 24/7, snowball your lanes out of control, and you can just have a very strong early game. Once you do end up getting your lanes ahead, control those early dragons. I think he's so good for the meta because once you do end up getting your lanes a little bit ahead, you just have a very easy time taking those dragons, getting to Dragon Soul. Once you do reach the mid to late game, you're very tanky on the pick. You provide your team with a ton of utility in fights, so he's overall just a very strong pick for solo queue at the moment. So moving on to a few mid lane picks, it kind of hurts me to say, but Galio mid is back here in 10.7. With the buffs to his ultimate in this patch, or with the buff to his ultimate, he's doing much better. He's performing so well right now into most of the meta assassin picks, especially against the AP assassin picks, things like Katarina, Fizz, Echo. He does so well into right now because you got the Aftershock, you got the W. If those champions try to dive on top of you, you CC them, you proc the Aftershock, they do no damage to you at all. Come the mid to late game, it's so much harder for those champions to actually assassinate either you or your AD carry, because now with your ultimate, with that magic shield, you just provide your AD carry with so much peel and so much ability to just survive for an extended duration in fights. He's very similar to the Maokai pick up in the top lane, to where you're always going to be pretty useful on the champion. You can always provide your team with something, even if you do fall behind a little bit in the early game. You got good utility, you got good peel and fights for your carries, so even if you don't have the best game on the pick, he's much better than most other mid lane champions, especially much better than most other mid lane assassins, because he's not super reliant on snowballing in the early game. And then for my second mid lane pick here, in my opinion, one of the strongest assassins right now is Diana. And if you'd even classify her as that, I feel like Diana is like a mix of a bruiser and assassin right now, which just makes her such a strong pick because she doesn't really have the same weakness as a lot of other assassins, to where they're pretty squishy. You can one-shot them pretty easily in fights if they do make a mistake. But with Diana, with Rod of Ages, with the Zhonya's, like, you can still one-shot with this build. You can still have a very good team fight, but you're also difficult to kill, which makes her a very annoying champion to deal with. Once you do hit your level 6 with Diana, your skirmish, your 1v1, your 2v2 is just so strong. You can win those pretty much every single time, and I feel like similar to the Wukong top pick, she just doesn't have a ton of weaknesses compared to a lot of other mid lane champions that are similar to Diana. Like, you got that good one-shot potential, you got good 1v1 potential, but you can also team fight extremely well with Diana, so you got pretty much everything that you would want in a mid lane assassin pick, if you'd even call her that right now for 10.7. So down to the bot lane now for a couple picks. My first AD carry is going to be Caitlyn. So I think Caitlyn, very strong laning pick at the moment. There's very few champions that can beat her in the laning phase. And with the meta the way it is right now down in the bot lane, or with the most picked AD carries right now, you got Ezreal, Kai'Sa, you got Vayne. Those are 3 out of the 5 most picked AD carries in 10.7. So Caitlyn wins those matchups very easily in the early game, can exploit them extremely well, and you can just get a very good advantage going throughout the laning phase, throughout the early game in those matchups with Caitlyn. The support meta also really complements Caitlyn right now, because there's a lot of good early game supports being played. If you can pair her up with something like a Nami, a Thresh, Nautilus, Leona, then you can have such a good laning phase. And if the enemy team has something like an Ezreal Pyke or a Vayne Morgana or something like that, you can just exploit that early game that much harder and snowball out of control. And the best AD carry in the game for it feels like the past couple of months now is Miss Fortune, and she's still a great pick right now. Really good blind pick, got a good laning phase. She has the ability to always be useful. I think she's just overall the best blind pick AD carry, because she's a pick to where even if you don't have the best laning phase, which is pretty difficult to do unless you really mess up with Miss Fortune, you're always going to scale well into the mid to late game. You always have the ability to have impact once you just hit a good ultimate in a fight, or once you get like 2 or 3 items, you're always going to be useful on the pick. So I just think that she's the best AD carry overall that you can play in this patch. Best blind pick, best everything down in the bot lane for the carry role. And then for a couple support picks here to round it out, the best laning support, the best range laning support in the game at the moment is Nami. There's very few champions who do well into Nami at the moment. She's just got such a good laning phase, especially if you pair her up with a good laning AD carry, something like a Lucian or a Caitlyn. Ever since she did get those buffs a while back to her E, to where it now procs off of abilities, it just makes her all-in potential in the laning phase insanely good. If you just put that on something like a Lucian, you give him the extra damage there, you give him the healing from your W, you got good pick potential in the laning phase there with your Q. So she's just overall very good laning champion, pretty good all-in potential once you hit the level 6 as well. Then once you do hit your Athene Spike, that item is just so nasty on the pick. You just provide your AD carry or provide your team with so much healing in fights. And then for my final support pick here to round out the video, it's going to be a very underrated pick that's been on the rise the past few patches here, and it's Taric. So Taric is just so complementary to how the meta is shaping out at the moment in other roles. You got things like Echo, Jarvan, Zac being played a ton right now in the jungle, these heavy engaged jungle picks, and those are such strong picks paired up with Taric because you can just press go in a fight, you can press your ultimate with Taric, those champions can look to engage, they're taking no damage at all when the ultimate comes down, and it just makes your team fight insanely strong. If you also take a look at some of the strongest top lane picks at the moment, you got things like Wukong, who's the best top laner right now, so good paired up with Taric, and he just does a really good job at countering those picks as well. He does very good into dive champions because if the enemy team has something like a Jarvan and a Wukong, you're so good with your ultimate in fights, you just use that whenever they look to engage, and it allows for you to peel those champions really well and keep your carries alive for an extended duration. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. Those are 10 of the strongest blind picks right now for 10.7. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.